Croeso friends, the world is a much scarier place than it was 2 months ago or even 2 weeks ago. I haven't been very motivated or had the energy to do a lot of the things that I've been planning on this year, partially because of some personal things in my life and now mostly because of this pandemic situation. It's been a struggle, honestly, to feel like anything that I could be doing right now that is directly related to pandemic prevention or survival isn't frivolous or unworthy in some way. So I haven't been doing a lot of sewing or painting or making of any kind. And I've honestly found that to be detrimental to my own mental health for several reasons. One of which is that I really do love making things. I love creating. I've been doing it since I was very little. And I've decided that I'm just going to keep going, whether it feels frivolous or not, because I watch a lot of YouTube videos. Some of my favorite artists and historical clothing people and costumers have gotten me through some very upsetting and worrisome times. And I figure if maybe I can do the same thing for someone else, then that in and of itself is worthy. At least I will feel better because I'll be making something. So, with that being said, my boyfriend and I have been self-isolating together. He lives in one city and I live in another about 2.5 hours away. And we've been kind of going back and forth between the two houses so that we can be isolated together but still take care of things in each place. This past weekend, I went out there for a few days and realized that it's been almost 4 weeks since I uploaded anything to Opus LNI, and that just feels like too long to me. So I went through some of the fabric that I'm storing at his house and decided I was going to make myself a 1-layer linen London hood, because I don't have one of those. I have several woolen London hoods, and I'm in the process of making myself a silk one for fancy times, but I don't have any that I can wear comfortably in the summer in Texas. So the criteria for this particular hood is that I needed it to be 1 layer of 100% linen. So not a linen rayon blend, not a linen cotton blend. I wanted it to be something that I don't have to worry about becoming an overheating hazard for me. I have suffered heat injuries in the past and am therefore more susceptible to them now. Criteria 2, I don't know if anybody remembers the Manuscript challenge that had been going around a few years ago. For those of you who don't know, the Manuscript challenge was a challenge to find an image in a manuscript or historical painting, basically an illustrative primary source, and recreate either elements of that outfit or the entire outfit and then wear it at a reenactment event. And as in so many things, not the least of which is starting a historical costuming YouTube channel, I am not necessarily an early adopter. I see people do these things and I get very excited about them, and I don't do them until either nobody's doing them anymore or everyone is doing them and my contribution is completely lost in the tide. So a couple of years ago, I picked out an image that I wanted to create for my own manuscript challenge. It is this lovely kneeling lady in green from the Romance of Alexander, which is an English manuscript from about 1340. It's a little earlier than my beloved 1380s, but style disbursement being what it was, it's conceivable that this particular style didn't make it to Wales until closer to my preferred decade. And even if not, this is still something that Ellen's mother might conceivably have worn instead. So friends, grab your favorite cuppa. Mine currently is a gin and tonic, and let's get into it. The fabric that I'm using here is actually an old lined skirt that a friend of mine gave me when it no longer fit her. So the first thing that I need to do is cut off the hems from the top and bottom. Normally I would consider picking apart these hems, but there is some wear along the bottom and top of the seam lines that I just want to get rid of, so I'm cutting them off instead. Here I'm starting to draw out the cutting diagram for the hood. I don't have a specific pattern that I work from, it's all based on the measurements of my head, neck, and shoulders. The diagram I use is based loosely on the one from the medieval tailor's assistant, and as you can see, it's basically a square with a liripipe coming off of one top corner and the mantle added to the bottom. A quarter circle gusset is added to each side of the mantle over the shoulders. The liripipe is just a long strip of fabric that will be sewn into a tube and tapered at the end. I'm starting off by hand sewing the liripipe to the hood body. I am using a small back stitch since it's likely that this seam will take some strain from the weight of the liripipe. Normally, I would use a silk thread for this, like the extant garment from Bayard Castle, but my partner doesn't have any silk, so I'm just using a cotton polyester sewing thread in a color not too much darker than my fabric. Now that the back stitching is finished, I will make sure that the linen doesn't fray by flat felling the seam. This is accomplished by cutting one side of the seam allowance down by about half and then folding the longer side over that and laying it flat against the fabric. The folded seam allowance is then secured by a whip stitch. A lot of people seem to have trouble figuring out how to set gores. I do have a tutorial planned, but for now I'll just give a simplified overview. First of all, I mark out the seam allowances on the body of the hood. These taper in from about a 1/2 inch, my standard seam allowance, to just a couple of threads at the top of the opening. Then, with the gore upside down and the right sides of the fabric facing each other, I make a couple of stitches to secure the very top of the gore to the top of the opening. Then I flip the gore down and inside the body of the hood. I can then pin each side of the gore to the slit in the hood, making sure to align the marked seam lines. Once that is finished, I will sew along the marked lines from the point of the gore downwards, using a small backstitch for sturdiness. Even if I'm sewing a project on a machine instead of by hand, I always set the points of the gores by hand, sewing them from the point down 2 or 3 inches. I find that I have better control over the fabric that way, and everything lays better. Once the gore is all sewn in, I will felt these seams just as I did with the liripipe, making sure to cut the hood side seam allowance and folding the gore side seam allowances over to the outside. I will also reinforce the points of the gores from the outside, but I will show that later in the video.
Next, I continue sewing the seams of the hood, switching back and forth between a running stitch for areas that won't be taking much strain and backstitch for areas that need extra reinforcement. All seams are filled in the same way to prevent fraying and add sturdiness. The face opening and bottom edge are hemmed with a simple double fold secured with a whip stitch. The manuscript image shows a white line at each of the hems, so here I am attaching some thin silk cording along the very edge of the face opening and hem. When I said I would reinforce the points of the gore, well, here we go. I needed to wait until I got home in order to have a thread that better matches the fabric color. In this case, I am using a Gutermann silk sewing thread. I'm basically just taking very tiny, closely spaced whip stitches from the right side, catching both the hood and gore fabric to reinforce this stress point. Once the hand sewing is completely finished, I have to figure out exactly how I want to handle the dots along the bottom edge of the hood. I thought about embroidering filled circles, and if the garment was lined, I might have gone that route, but I want the inside to be as clean as possible since it's a single layer. So my thought was either to use pearls or metal bezants, small, thin coins. Both practices have historical precedent. In 1352, Charles V received an outer garment embroidered with pearls that is still extant today, and bezants are referenced in many accounts of embellished clothing from the 12th to the 15th centuries. In the end, I decided to use pearls because they matched the white silk cord edging, and also I had them in my stash already. Here I'm securing them to the hood with a double stitch tied securely on the inside.
So there we have it, friends. A single layer, 100% linen hood inspired by a manuscript image made entirely from stash materials, some of which were from a stash that wasn't even mine, entirely hand sewn in just over a weekend. Not too bad for someone who wasn't sure she would be able to create anymore. In any case, thank you for coming along with me on this journey. I hope that everyone out there is keeping safe and well and occupied, and that you have as many supplies as you possibly could need for all of your quarantine projects. What have you been working on during your self-isolation? Tell me down below in the comments. I always love to hear from everyone. And please, if you don't have the time or the capacity to make things right now, that's okay. It's fine if all you can do is keep going from day to day. That is enough, and you are enough. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and if you're interested in getting notifications when I upload new videos, make sure to click the little bell, especially since I can't guarantee a fortnightly upload schedule right now. And if you're so inclined, please consider sharing this video to social media as well. The sooner that I get to 100 subscribers, the sooner I can get a custom URL for this channel. Wheel! Oh, great. Now I messed up my lipstick. Oh.